So it's been a hell of a week for the Montreal Canadiens. 3 straight wins before they hit the road. 4 wins out of the last 5, and they still remain in third place in the Atlantic Division. It's going to be a tight weekend and a tough one for them as they face off against the Nashville Predators and the Carolina Hurricanes once again. And they've got a few tough decisions coming up in the offseason that some of you have asked about, and I want to go over, including what's going to happen with our Bergevin, just to name a few. We'll also touch on a conversation that was had on another show in regards to Sam Montembeault. Some people say he stays. Some people say he goes. What do I say? Let's talk live. So it's Friday and another live broadcast here on PuckTalk Montreal. Thanks for tuning in, as you normally do tonight at 8 p.m. And while we wait for your questions to come in and we wait for everybody to say hello, we'll get into the crux of the matter. And that is, of course, starting with the bench boss breakdown, which, of course, has to do with us previewing the game tomorrow between the Nashville Predators and the Montreal Canadiens. Now, I'm not going to do my normal breakdown because you're talking about a segment that I normally stretch out for about 20 minutes. And since we're live, I really want to get to what you want to talk about as opposed to the preview and other subjects that we've got tonight. Because the other subjects, I really want to go a little bit more in depth because there's a lot of opinion involved and I've taken notes and I don't want anything to get lost in the shuffle. But let's talk primarily, to start, about the Canadiens going to Smashville to take on the Predators. Now, yes, the Predators are in the Western Conference. Yes, you know, it's not a 4-point game, but as you take a look at the graphic, there's a lot that's going on in terms of tomorrow night's game. They're in Nashville, and means a hell of a lot more than just the regular 2 points. On the surface, you look at the schedule and you say, okay, first game of a back-to-back, Nashville Saturday, Carolina Sunday, and that's not exactly why this game matters. It's a maturity test for Montreal, plain and simple. You know, they're heading on the road after a stretch of wins at home, and this is going to test their focus. This is a game where it's going to tell you whether or not this team is actually taking strides and growing up, or whether it's just a flash in the pan and what happened over the past couple of days, including the win over Carolina, was just a sheer fluke. So the question is this: can the Canadiens stay locked in on the game that's in front of them, or do they start looking ahead to Carolina before they've taken care of business against Nashville? And personally, I don't think they're looking ahead to any game. Montreal comes into this one playing some really good hockey. They've got confidence, they've got structure. Defensively, they've been much better than they have been over the season, and they're starting to look more like a team that understands that these games matter, that they're for all intents and purposes, they're in the middle of their playoffs, for lack of a better way of putting it. These aren't throwaway games. Whether you're playing East-West, it doesn't matter. These are playoff pressure games, and that changes everything because it tests the Canadiens' will. But Nashville isn't just going to sit there and wait to be beaten, right? This is a desperate team as well that's fighting for their own playoff life. And it's a team at home with urgency, with veteran players, and with enough experience that they know how to punish mistakes. They'll have plenty of weapons despite their, that early season, the way this team started, and, they didn't start very well. Now they're starting to surge at the right time. They're pushing their way up the playoff ladder. And, after Barry Trotz decided that he was going to call it quits after this season, things started to roll in the right direction. Now, I don't think the GM had anything to do with it because Barry Trotz is a very smart hockey mind. But I think it had more to do with the fact that the guys realized that Coach Trotz, that's what everybody calls him, was calling it quits because things just weren't working out the way he foresaw them. And so the guys took accountability, and that's what you want your players to do. And like I said, Nashville's still got plenty of weapons despite their early season problems, right? Just like the Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets started their season like crap, and now all of a sudden they've turned it around and they're looking a hell of a lot better. And when you look at the Predators, there's a bunch of different weapons on this team that you normally, don't see very often, starting with Roman Josi. Much like Werenski on the Blue Jackets, he's the catalyst on defense. He opens up space, he skates the puck up the ice, and he creates offense with his legs. You've got Steven Stamkos, despite his age, still leading the team with 36 goals. Ryan O'Reilly leads the team in points with 66. And they have other threats like Jonathan Marchessault, although he hasn't had the season that he'd like, and Philip Forsberg, who always seems to be a thorn in the Canadiens' ass whenever we play Nashville. So if Montreal comes in a little loose, maybe a bit too casual, and maybe halfway to Sunday mentally, the Predators are going to make them pay. And that's why I don't look at this game like some sort of warm-up for Carolina. It's not an appetizer. It's not a setup game. It's a real test because it's also going to test the Canadiens. It's their last back-to-back of the season. Like, holy hell, come out and play both, right? Serious teams don't choose which games are pressure games and which ones aren't and which ones count. Serious teams beat the team in front of them. In this case, it's the Predators. Serious teams understand that the real trap is not always your opponent. You know how we always joke about, Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. No, the trap is in your own mindset. For Montreal, that challenge comes tomorrow night. Can they stay disciplined? Can they stay emotionally even? And can they play the right way without cheating the moment? That's the biggest test here. Can they give Nashville their full attention and earn the right to worry about Carolina the next day? Because if you can, then you're seeing growth, real growth. Not just talent, not just energy, and not just, good vibes, for lack of a better way of putting it. Growth, road maturity, game management, playoff style focus, and that's what we really want. So my read is simple. It's not just a warm-up. It's a playoff style test against a team desperate to make their own playoff push. And if the Canadiens want to prove that they're becoming a real team when the pressure rises, the mission is very simple in this game. Beat Nashville first, worry about Carolina later. That's the breakdown. It's very simple. This is a team that is so similar to the way the Columbus Blue Jackets are structured outside of one very particular detail. Nashville has a lot more veterans on their team, and they also have better goaltending. And while Greaves was good for Columbus, you cannot compare him to a UC Saros. It's like apples to oranges. So Nashville can really be a much more dangerous team than Columbus was in terms of the damage that they can do to the Canadiens. We'll see how that works out. Now, I got a question in the comments for yesterday's show from Hugo Win25 that got me thinking, right? He was asking about Arbor Jackeye specifically and what the Canadiens are going to do with him. And I went back and I looked and I thought to myself, you know what? The Canadiens just don't have Jackeye as an RFA at the end of this season, as you guys are starting to chime in on the chat. Thank you very much. I'll get to those questions a little bit later. But they've got 4 different RFAs in 4 different situations when you take a look at it globally, right? You've got Zach Bolduc, who's coming off his entry-level contract, Kirby Dach, Joe Veleno, and, of course, as I mentioned, Arbor Jackeye. And even though they're all restricted free agents, they're not all for equal decisions, not even close, because the situation is different for each one. The way the Canadiens are building the roster is very serious now. And this is where the Canadiens have to decide, who do we keep? Who do we buy more time on? Who has something to prove? And are we ready to move on from one particular guy? So in order to really give you an idea of the way I look at it, anytime there's an RFA, there are 4 different pillars that I have available to me. And I think most GMs have them as well anyway, but seeing as how I run a junior team, this is how I look at it, especially with players that I know are returning. One is, obviously, do I keep them? Do I bridge them over? Do they have something to prove? And do I just plainly move on from them? And so once you take those factors in and you look at the usage, the injury history, the role, and the fit, you can actually think about the answers in a very clear light. So let's start, to me, with the one that is the most obvious, and that is, of course, Zach Bolduc. And this isn't because he's just coming off a good performance against the Blue Jackets, but it's what we gave up for him that really matters in this case. You bridge Zach Bolduc no matter what. That's the move. You don't move on from him. You don't give him some big long-term contract, that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years and try to buy some of his free agent years. You bridge. Because Bolduc feels like a player that still has a lot to give. And I think a lot of you will agree with that. There's a lot of skill there. We know that. We know he can be physical because he wasn't early in the season. He's starting to show it now. And given his performance last night, there's some offense there. So you could see why Montreal wants to keep investing in him, right? But at the same time, I don't think he's the player that has fully defined his game just yet, right? And that's the key. If he was a guy who was coming out much like, let's say, for example, if this was Yuri Slafkovsky's RFA year, which would have been last season if they hadn't re-signed him, just as an example, then maybe, just maybe, I'd try to go long term, like they did with Slafkovsky. They had a vision for him. They saw what results they were getting out of him. They said, okay, let's bite the bullet. Let's lock him up for 8 years. Perfect. And that's the difference between Bolduc's situation and Slafkovsky's, in the sense that you're not locking him in long term because he's still got a lot to prove to you. Because right now the Canadiens don't fully know what they have in him yet, right? They've seen flashes. They see that he's got middle six potential. He's filled in on the top line as well. And they think there's more that they can get out of him, right? It's not done yet, right? He does a lot of good work in practice, as we've heard from multiple people out there. So the fact that he practices well and he works hard at practice will eventually translate to what happens during games. But I also think that he hasn't really locked himself into a permanent level yet, right? In his own mind, because anybody who's young always worries about the next day, the next year, the next contract. And that's what you have your bridge deal for. Because your bridge deal defines something to the player. It tells him, we like you, we believe in you, we want to keep you, but you need to show us more. So if you're going to give him that short little bridge of 2 years or 3, whatever the case is, then he knows he's got some time to really work on his game and prove that he's worth that longer contract, right? And what the Canadiens are trying to tell him with a bridge deal is, show us that you can do it consistently, because that's something that's been missing from his game. Can you take another step forward? Can you show us real growth and not just flashes? Because if there's one thing that St. Louis learned about Bolduc last year, is that he's streaky. And the last streaky player the Canadiens had on this team was a guy by the name of Brian Savage, who would score only during the month of October, and then the rest of the year he'd get goals here and there, but not really a player that you can count on over an 80 game or 82 game schedule. It was 80 games back then anyway. Because take this as an example. If Bolduc does break through, great. You keep the asset, you keep the upside, and you didn't overpay too early. And if he stays in the more streaky range, you still have yourself protected as a team, right? And so for me, this one's very, very simple. Keep the player, bridge the contract. Kind of like Clemenza and The Godfather. Take the gun, leave the cannoli. And so for me, 2 years feels right. 3 would be maybe a little too long, but yeah, two is enough. And that's it. 2-year bridge. Tell the kid, okay, Zach, we like you. We want to make sure that you stay with our team, but we need to see more from you because we believe you have it in you. It's also the same thing Patrick Watt did with him when he moved him from center to the wing and told him the exact same thing. I'm putting you on the wing to take some of the pressure away. Now show me what you got. And he did. That's what got him drafted. That's what got him to the show. Now the Canadiens need to do something similar to make sure that he knows, hey, they like me. They want to keep me. Let's go. And from what he said yesterday, we know he loves to play in Montreal. Then there is the one case we always look back on, the curious case of Kirby Dach. This one gets a little bit tougher because in some cases we like Dach, in some other cases we don't. To me, I think you give Dach what the level I call prove it. And that's kind of where the conversation is going to split a little bit, right? Because with Dach, there's 2 versions of this conversation. It's not really as cut and dry as Bolduc. The first is talent. On talent, you know it's there, right? He's got a big body, he's got hands, he's got skill, he's good at puck protection, playmaking ability. So he has everything the Canadiens are looking for in a big, sizable forward, right? A guy that can contribute. And when he's on, you can see the appeal, right? And we can all attest to the fact that it's exciting when Kirby Dach plays extremely well and he contributes in the lineup. And you could still see why the organization wants to keep betting on him. But then there's a second part, his availability, his injury history. And that's where the whole thing changes, right? Because at some point, you have to stop evaluating the idea of a player and start evaluating the reality of the player. And the reality is very simple. His injury history has become a part of his file. It's not a side note. It's not bad luck one time. It's happened multiple times. 2 knee injuries, a broken foot. And that's what happens when you can't, negotiate like it's a long-term bet, right? You get that, you're in limbo with a player, right? That doesn't mean you give up on him. That would be bad asset management, I think, anyway. But it also means that you can't hand him comfort, right? And you're not going to give him a deal based on hope. You're going to give him something that is based in reality. And that's the line you draw as a general manager. If I'm Doc, or with Doc, I should say, I want to keep the player because there's potential there. He can bring so much to the table for the Canadiens. But I do what I did with Sean Monahan in the sense that, okay, he's an RFA, I get it. I tell him, Kirby, I'm going to qualify you and I want to re-sign you for another year, but I need you to stay healthy. I need you to prove me right. And it's 1 year for him to prove that he can stay healthy and he can still contribute, right? And the message is going to be obvious that the Canadiens are going to give to the player. We believe you've got talent. But now you need to show us that you can stay healthy, that you can handle your role, and they could be there consistently because that's what they need. They can't have him in and out of the lineup, right? The Canadiens are getting closer to the point where results matter more than anything else. And you can't keep building around players that you're not sure are going to be there. It's as simple as that. It's an honest truth. So with Doc, as I said, we know the upside is there, but there's still risk because of his injury history. He's not somebody you move on from very easily. Not just yet anyway. So for me, it's a 1-year contract. Prove it. Show me that you can stay healthy. Show me that you can contribute. Now let's get to the cleanest roster call, and that is Joe Veleno. Joe Veleno is a move on. And this isn't personal. It's professional, right? It's practical. Because with players like Veleno, you question this. You don't question something like, can he play in the NHL? What you question is, does he bring any value to my team? Right? Does he fit into the direction I'm trying to take in terms of my hockey club? And the answer to that is strictly and positively no. And the usage tells you that, right? A player that sits out of the lineup for as long as Veleno does, when he feels like he's injury insurance, when he looks like he's more like a spare part than, an engine that drives the bus, then you have your answer. He's not a core player. We all know that. He's not a long-term meaningful bet by any stretch for the Canadiens, right? They picked him up because they needed a little bit more depth at center. And that's replaceable depth at forward that the Canadiens can find anywhere, whether it's a kid from the minors or, somebody they pull off the wing or even somebody they'll pull off, maybe waivers or pick up as a free agent. And every team has a lot of those guys that can just fill in and close a gap. And with the fact that Michael Hage is coming in, that gives you even more reason to question whether or not you want to bring Veleno back. And again, the answer to me is no. The issue is very simple. The Canadiens should be trying to get sharper in their bottom six, right? And so they need more identity, they need more pace, they need more pressure, and they need more trust. And while you look at Veleno and you say to yourself, you don't see a player that I can't trust, he's not a player that really fits the role that you're looking for, right? And that's the point. Could you keep him for cheap? Sure. Could you argue that he's fine as an extra forward? Absolutely. But if we're talking about what Montreal should do in terms of building this team and simplifying their roster, you move on. You open the spot up for a younger kid, you create flexibility, you create internal competition, and you look for a better fit. And so because of the 4 names on this list, Veleno is the one that feels the most like a placeholder than anything else. And eventually, placeholders have to go. And that's what makes Veleno, to me, a very clear move on. It's unfortunate. I like the guy. I like his energy. I like the fact that he's a team player. But, guys like Veleno are a dime a dozen in the National Hockey League, right? And so maybe that's harsh, but at the same time, it's just reality. And then, of course, comes the crux of the matter, what made me start talking about RFAs in the first place, and that is, of course, the pending future of Arbor Xhekaj. And this is the one that's going to garner the biggest reaction from everybody, right? To me, Arbor is a keep, period. Okay? And I know there's going to be pushback. I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, oh, well, they should move him because he doesn't play enough. And, you're going to ask me, Coach, how can he be kept if the trust hasn't been there? How can he be kept if his minutes haven't always been there? How can he be kept if he spends more time in the press box than he does on the ice? It's a fair question. But this is where context really matters when it comes to Arbor Xhekaj, because if the only focus for Xhekaj was his ability to play, then there wouldn't be any focus at all, right? You would miss what he actually is, because he brings something to this roster that we all know we don't have enough of. Edge, pushback, presence, intimidation. And the fact that he could chuck the mitts and beat most of the guys in this league changes the feel of a game, and that really matters. You need to have that available to you. And I know some people love to pretend that that stuff doesn't matter anymore. I don't buy that crap. I've been around the game long enough to know that being able to be tough out there really does matter. Because if you can't push back, teams take advantage of you. We saw what they tried to do yesterday to Lane Hudson. The team pushed back. There wasn't a fight, but there was call it a group hug or whatever you want to do. And then the same thing happened later when Boone Jenner ran over Jakub Dobeš. And it was Lane Hudson that came in to defend his goaltender. Wasn't a scrap, but it was enough to tell them, hey, buzz off. And so those are the type of things you want to see. And then if it gets out of hand and you see teams are taking too many liberties, you call the number 72 and you say, buddy, lace them up. You're getting in. So you don't just play guys because you hit people, right? And you don't just play guys, because they can fight. But you can give a team a real pushback when you have a deterrent in your lineup, a real emotional presence, and that has value. And we know the guys on the Canadiens love Arbor. You see him at practice. He's teaching Struble how to fight. He's teaching guys how to pin guys along the boards and keep them there. So if you're looking for a guy who's a real team player and doesn't mind the situation right now, that's Arbor Xhekaj for you. Now, is he perfect? No. We know that he still has to work on details in his game, right? We know that his reads need to get cleaner. His ability to move the puck has to get better. He needs to learn to stop chasing as much, yada, yada, yada. We all know that. And that's extremely fair to look at. But sometimes I think teams make the mistake with players like this in the sense that they're too obsessed with sanding down every rough edge and, focusing more on his value in terms of what he can do with the puck or what he can do on defense, as opposed to what he can do when the chips are on the table and the going gets tough, right? I mean, Arbor Xhekaj doesn't have to become a polished top four defenseman by any stretch, right? But he has to become solid. He has to be a useful NHL defenseman, and even if he has a defined role and a defined identity. And I think he has that, right? I see Arbor Xhekaj, given his skill set, being able to convert his game a lot like Lyle Oehlein did. Because if you remember Lyle Oehlein early in his career, he was a lot more of a guy that would take a lot of risks. He'd be a scrapper. He'd go for the big hit. And he would take away defensively when he was doing all the wrong things on the ice. He settled down. He focused a little bit more on playing his game as opposed to dropping the mitts, although he still could. And if you take a look at him, even through the 93 Cup run, he was one of the Canadiens' most reliable defensemen. And I could see that in Arbor because he's got all the tools. He's not a guy in the sense of let's say a Ryan Reeves who doesn't bring much to the table outside of being able to fight, or George Larac like he used to be, right, where he'd score the occasional goal every 2 years. I think Arbor can bring a hell of a lot more than that to the table given his skill set. So if the Canadiens try to rely on him a little bit more, that's great. And the fact that his edge is there, that matters. That response matters. And that feeling that the young players know that they're not alone on the ice when things get tough every night, that matters too. So no, I'm not handing him some kind of huge deal because he's a walk-on. He still has a lot to prove in terms of his ability to play at the NHL level. But he has proven that he can handle it. But to me, he gets a short-term contract. 1, maybe 2 years. And in terms of the decision, you keep him, right? If I'm Kent Hughes, absolutely. Because he serves a purpose. He gives the roster identity. He still has room to grow. And he's well-liked in the room, right? He's part of the fabric of the Canadiens right now. So to me, it's all about keep. So if you go back and you review my final board in terms of these 4 players, you bridge Bolduc, you tell Herbie Doc that I'm signing you for a year, but you have to prove you can stay healthy. You move on from Joe Veleno, and you keep Arbor Xhekaj. You qualify him, or you give him a couple of extra years under contract, and you see where it goes from there. And honestly, that's exactly where the Canadiens are right now. Bolduc is worth the time. Doc is worth a controlled bet, just like Monahan was. Veleno is replaceable depth, and Arbor gives you something that you don't have in the lineup, right? And the team still needs. And that's why this offseason is going to be really important, because 2 years from now, there's a list of UFAs that are going to be off the books for the Canadiens, and there's going to be a lot more decisions that are going to need to be made. For this year, not too bad. There's going to be the decision, too, about what you do with Patrick Laine, but hey, it is what it is, right? So right now in the chat, what I want you to do is, if you haven't already done it, is let me know what you think about, Bolduc, Arbor, Doc, and Veleno. Do you agree with what I said in terms of keeping them, proving it, whatever? Or are you done with certain players that I think deserve another chance? Because moves like this aren't easy for GMs, right? Because players are there for a bit. You like them. You see what they can bring to the table. They give you hope. And then because they're young, you're worried about letting them go. Now, with Veleno, he's a little bit longer in the tooth, like I said. But when you take a look at Doc, you take a look at Bolduc, and you take a look at Xhekaj, they're all young players. So you can't just write them off and say, listen, screw it, we're done. And that's really important. Now on to the other part that I brought up early on in the show before we get to the live chat. And that is, of course, the toughest conversation that I think the Canadiens are going to have this summer. Although I think they already had it, and I already think they made a decision about it. They just couldn't work it out. And that is the future of Sam Montembeault. Now, Montembeault, to me, is the odd man out in goal for the Canadiens, and I think you would all agree, given how Dobish has played and taken over the net, and how Fowler has been able to back him up with solid starts. To me, it's a no-brainer. And this is not the shit on Sam, right? This isn't about me hating Sam Montembeault, because, again, I told you, I don't hate the player. I hate what's happened to him. I hate how he was treated. I hate how Eric Raymond neglected him when he needed him the most. And everything that happened from the beginning of the year till Raymond's firing has to do with where Montembeault is right now in terms of his game. And it messes with you when, you can't seem to fix what's broken, especially when you're a goaltender. When you're a player, you go through the motions, you work hard at practice, whatever. But when you're a goalie, it's hard to gauge how well you play in practice when game situations are completely different. Take it from experience, right? I could practice as much as I want and allow just 2 goals in practice. I'll be a happy camper. And then, I'll get pumped for 9, in a game, because we're playing an opponent that my team cannot handle. And that's out of the goalie's job description, right? It's not up to him to defend. It's not up to him to create offense. But it is up to him to be able to create hope and give his team the confidence to be able to move forward. And that's what Sam hasn't been able to do this year. And let's not pretend that he didn't give this team nothing, because he did, okay? And you got to give him credit for what he was able to do. Came to this team, off waivers, ended up being the backup to Jake Allen after Carey Price went on long-term injured reserve. Allen got traded. Montembeault became the de facto number 1 goaltender. Last season, he played 62 games, which were up and down, but nonetheless, he played a very good season under very tough circumstances after Primo couldn't shoulder the load as a backup. You know how it went. And then Dobish came in, was able to give him some quality starts, give Montembeault a little bit of reprieve in terms of his schedule, and that helped Monty get into the playoffs with a little bit of, let's say, confidence and extra energy. But then the wear and tear of a 62-game season for him is the reason why he pulled his groin and part of the reason why he couldn't get any real work done over the offseason. So he's a goaltender that's played very honest NHL minutes. And he gave them stretches where he kept this team afloat even when they played poorly. And the fact that he played well at the World Championships, that success matters as well. The fact that he was picked for the Four Nations Cup, that matters as well. But here's the question in the here and now. Has Montembeault given this team the level of goaltending it needs to be able to move forward with the group that they have right now? And in Coach K's mind, in my mind, it's not enough, right? It's not consistent enough, and it hasn't been good enough since the preseason. You know, a lot of people have said, yeah, Montembeault's played well in stretches, but you need to understand how I see it as a goaltender in terms of I never really liked Montembeault's style of play. I found holes in his game. You know, his butterfly wasn't solid. His stick was never in good position. He was always too deep in his net. And other teams recognize that as well. And the fact that he couldn't see a puck from outside the top of the circles was a huge detriment. But the most important part of this is that the team has actually changed in front of him. This isn't the same Canadiens team as it was when Marty St. Louis took over. This roster has more talent, more speed, more skill, more depth. And when you have all that and you want to move forward, as the young team starts to rise, your standard in net changes as well. And that's the point with the goaltending just being decent. It can't be decent. It needs to be able to push the team forward. It has to settle games down. It's got to protect young mistakes, and it's got to give the team confidence to move forward and change the momentum in a hockey game on a heartbeat, right? You watch the game versus Carolina. The fact that Dobish was there to be able to make big saves when the Canadiens need him, stopping not one but two breakaways. Was that the Carolina game? No, that was the Columbus game. But just to say, that confidence, it translates into the way your team can play in front of you. It gives them the trust to know that they can make the mistakes and you'll be there to take care of them. And right now, Montembeault's been passed by, right? Dobish has outplayed him. You cannot deny that part. And you can see it in the results, right? The guy just tied Carey Price's record for wins as a rookie with 24. And if you're honestly not talking about Dobish, by the way, in the Calder conversation, to me, you're a bit of a shithead. Pure and simple. And we could talk about that in the chat if you think that Jakub Dobish should get consideration for the Calder Trophy. We're talking about Beckett Seneca. We're talking about Ivan Demidov. We're talking about Oliver Kapanen. But the Canadiens have a third candidate in Jakub Dobish. And it needs to be looked at and it needs to be discussed because his value to this team is immense right now. And you could see that in the results, right? The team plays differently in front of him. And it's clear as day. And you could see that the crease feels different to everybody playing in front of him, right? In the sense that Dobish looks like a goalie that can survive pressure, make the second save when you need it, and give them a real chance when things look a little too chaotic. And then, of course, you've got Jacob Fowler, the up-and-comer, the guy that Carey Price says he sees a lot of himself in the way that Fowler composes himself. And yes, his sample size is still a little too small to really anoint him as the second coming of Carey Price. It'd be unfair to do that to this guy right now. And we have to be honest about what we've seen from him so far, because in his first stint with the Canadiens, he played well, but tailed off. And that's to be expected from a rookie goaltender who's had a cup of coffee in the American Hockey League, right? Dobish had more time, more seasoning, more ability to be able to acclimatize himself to a longer schedule. Fowler's still learning that part. And he may not have the largest body of work, right? But when it comes to this young goalie earning belief, he's already done that. And that matters a lot. The guys have seen what he's capable of doing. They've seen the saves that he's able to make. And they've seen how composed he is in net. And that, again, despite the fact that he might give up a couple of goals here and there, gives his team confidence. And so basically when you're looking at goaltending, it's all about trajectory. Dobish is pushing the present, and Fowler is pushing the future. And Montembeault, it feels like he's stuck in the mud. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because the Canadiens are no longer asking who can just get us through the season now, because that's not the case. Now they're asking themselves, who can help us to get to the next level? Who can win us a playoff series? And that's a different question altogether. And to me, that's not Sam Montembeault. I don't think he's got it in him anymore, right? And I don't think he ever did because that wasn't his part of it, right? Now let's get to the whole trade part because there's been a lot of smoke when it comes to the discussion about trading Sam Montembeault, whether it's just him versus a draft pick, and most people think it might be a third, or whether he's packaged with somebody else to be able to get something in return that'll bring more value to the Canadiens. There have been a lot of rumblings around Montreal looking into moving him at the deadline, right? There were. And, we know that's going to be revisited this summer because honestly, it would make total sense to think that Montembeault was the guy at the deadline that the Canadiens could not move. And now if you're Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton, you have to start clearing bottlenecks in your lineup in order to be able to move your team forward. You have to make decisions based on timeline. You have to look at the roster and ask yourself, who fits the team right now with the direction that we're going in? In goal, the picture's becoming clear. Dobesh is the here and now when it comes to goaltending, and Fowler is the big part of your future. We've already established that. And Montembeault looks like the transitional goalie that he was when the Canadiens went out to get him. And to me, that's fine. And to Montembeault, to a certain extent anyway, that should be fine too, because if he came into Montreal expecting to be the number one goaltender at any point in time, I would tell him I have a bridge in Brooklyn that I want to sell. Because, it just isn't reality when it comes to a guy who was a third stringer in Florida. Let's call it what it is. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have any value because he's proven that he can shoulder the load, especially when, let's say, your number one goes down. So, in fact, he has a lot of value because another team might look at him and see a goalie who has handled those difficult minutes, who's shown flashes of brilliance, and who's may just be in need of a change of environment. And we've said that before about Monty, right? Playing in his hometown may put that extra pressure on him that, he may not mentally be able to handle. All of that's totally possible. And for Montreal, moving him actually solves two issues. Number one, it clears the crease. And number two, it brings clarity. Clarity matters right now because it gives a clear picture to the guys in your locker room that, boys, we believe in our goaltending. It's no longer a distraction. Let's focus on what we need to do defensively and offensively to get us to the next level. This rebuild is no longer about patience. It's about progression. It's about making sure you get wins out of your performances. And it's about letting your young players force decisions. And that's exactly what's happening in Nets, right? That's what healthy organizations do because they've got that depth, that ability to bring a player up. And that doesn't mean we don't have others that are coming up right now because there is Volokin, there is Radkov, and obviously the Canadian, I think there's Alexei Cornway as well, who's a goaltender in the system. So there's a lot coming up. And so prospects making veterans expendable, it's part of the business, right? It's exactly where you want the Canadiens to be right now because it shows you the turnover in terms of drafting to development to the final product. And ultimately, that's what's going to tell you by itself that the rebuild's done. And so this is the part of the rebuild in Nets right now that last season we were saying Fowler's going to come up and Montembeault's going to be out of a job. Well, here we are. The pressure's on Montembeault, right? He's done. I don't think he's going to see another game in net for the Canadiens. Some people out there, though, will turn around and say that Dobesh still has a lot to prove, and that's fair because it is his rookie season. Some will say that, as I said, Fowler's sample size is too small. Also fair. Some will say that Montembeault deserves another chance because of what he's given the team in the more leaner years. And I understand that too, but if you go back and you look at Carey Price's time with the Montreal Canadiens, it wasn't as if they were breaking down barriers and scoring goals ad nauseum. The league doesn't move on sentiment. It moves on projection and prediction. It moves on performance. It moves on timing. And timing matters here. The Canadiens need to decide whether they're keeping a goalie because he fits the future or because they're attached to the past. And you can't be attached to the past. That's the choice. In my mind, the answer is even clearer than Volano. I think the Canadiens seriously need to revisit a Montembeault trade in the summer. Not because he failed, not because he's useless, but because he's still got value and the team is moving on to another direction, right? Dobish has arrived. We've seen that. Fowler is moving up the chain, and Montembeault is the one cut in between, as I mentioned. And that happens in hockey. It's not always personal. It should never be personal. It should always be professional, because if you get personal, that's when you make the decisions more difficult than they should be. Sometimes the timeline just moves on, and that's exactly what happened to Montembeault here. And you know what? For everything that he might have gone wrong for him this season, you do need to give him a little bit of love for what he was able to do in his first few years with Montreal. He wasn't expected to do much, right? But his performance allowed the Canadiens to move Jake Allen, make him the number one for now, until their goaltending pushed through. And that's what's happening here. So if the Canadiens can turn Montembeault into an asset, a future piece, or package him in a deal that would get them a better piece that they're looking for, then they absolutely have to explore it. Because the worst thing they can do right now is stay with the status quo and have three goaltenders, because we know that system just definitely doesn't work. The crease is changing. And so I'm going to throw it out to you. Do you believe that Sam Montembeault is the odd man out, or do you want to keep him? Would you move him in the summer, or do you think he deserves another chance to fight his way back? I know what my answer is. It's no. I think that Fowler and Dobish have sealed the deal for Montembeault. But I want to hear from you. I want you to let me know. So there you have it. All of that in a nutshell in terms of the preview, the RFA status, and of course, what's going on with Monty. Now it's time for us to take a look at your questions. Let's go. Happy Festivus, Coach. I thought Festivus was in December. Corville G. Welcome to the show, by the way. I don't think I've seen your name into the chat all that often. Like Evans, Bolduc, and Anderson. Excuse me. Let me read that over again. I like the Evans, Bolduc, and Anderson line. Great energy, good speed, couple of hitters, and good down low. Will be essential for playoff success, assuming they stay healthy. If you notice something about Anderson in the past couple of games since he's been back, he's not hitting quite as much, or he's turning his backside into most of the hits, because a few games ago when he initially got pulled from the lineup, he threw a hit late in the third period and you could see it hurt his shoulders. Now, a bunch of, insiders were reporting that Columbus knew what they did when they got rid of Anderson because he has shoulder issues. I'm sorry, but when you skate as fast as Josh Anderson and you throw hits as hard as Josh Anderson, the possibility of jamming your shoulder on a hit is always there, okay? Look at what happened with Bolduc yesterday with his hit on Severson that took Severson out of the lineup. It looked like a nothing hit. It was right at the goal line. He bumped into him. Severson didn't go flying. He stood his ground, but it was enough to separate his shoulder. Now, whether or not it broke a collarbone, I don't know. I haven't heard, but Severson went to the locker room and never came back. And that was just from a simple hit from a guy who wasn't even going that fast. And when you see Anderson skate, he flies in like a bat out of hell. And could you imagine if he hits somebody when he's going that fast and the guy's up against the boards? Open ice is one thing, but against the boards that hard, anything can happen. And that's what did happen to Josh Anderson. So if he stays healthy, if Evans continues to stay healthy, and, if Bolduc contributes the way he did last night, then it's running roses for the Canadiens in terms of that line. That's for sure. Festivus, I want to understand what you mean by the Habs cheese the Preds tomorrow. And you would start Dobish. Yeah, I would start Dobish tomorrow too. But here's the thing. Which game is the more important game to you? Is it the Preds game or is it the Carolina game? Carolina's East, Preds are West. Dobish has played a couple games in back-to-back. Give him the rest. Put Fowler in. Play Dobish on Sunday. That would be my ascension, for lack of a better term. Hey, still smoking? If nobody gives Doc a dime, we should offer a nickel. Well, nobody's going to offer him anything. He's an RFA with arbitration rights, as is Veleno, as is Jacky. The only guy that doesn't have arbitration rights is Zach Bolduc. So whatever the Canadiens offer him, He's got to accept. He doesn't have a choice. Now, that's why I think the Canadiens are going to bridge him, given the fact that, they think his ceiling is a little bit higher. But for Doc, like I said, they're going to have to qualify him probably at around, I would say, the $4 million mark, unless they sign him to a contract where they tell him, Kirby, we need you to stay healthy. If you can't stay healthy for a year, then we're going to have to let you go as a UFA or trade him as a UFA, whatever the case is. But nobody's going to offer him anything right now because he's an RFA. And given his history, I really doubt that anybody's going to sign him to an offer sheet. Okay, Joe. I'm going to get back to this again because Paul said, what MSL? Stop, okay? Just stop. I'm going to say this another time because I did it in the show when I looked at whether or not Robida should be replaced. The problem isn't Marty, okay? Because Marty doesn't handle the defenseman. Marty delegates that to Robida. Let's make that abundantly clear. And Robida will get in his ear and say, oh, well, we should do this, we should do that. The problem is that Robida doesn't know how to coach big, solid, hard-nosed defensemen, right? He knows how to coach guys that are just like him, okay? He spent a lot of time in Toronto as the defensive coach, and after 6 seasons, they let him go. Why? Because the defense didn't get any better. And that's what's happening here in terms of the Canadiens, right? You've got guys that have been in the lineup for a few years now, whether it's Struble, whether it's Jack Eye, whatever, and they're not developing. Okay, yeah, Struble scored last night, but he still made the mistake of cutting across on the Severson goal. That's a mistake that needs to be weaned out, but that's something that Robida didn't notice, right? Or Robida doesn't get out of anybody because all of our defensemen tend to chase the puck. Pure and simple. And while you want to put pressure on the puck, I don't know anybody who outside of Pee Wee didn't learn that on a 2-on-1, you stay in between the forward with the puck and the possible pass, you give the shot to the goalie, you take away the passing option. Keep it simple, right? That's the concept. And did Struble do that? No. Does Struble deserve to be benched? His game wasn't that bad. But then again, neither has Jack Eyes when he's been in the lineup. As I've mentioned countless times, he's only had one game where I could really remember him giving away the puck twice egregiously in the same game. Outside of that, his season has been good enough, right? He's been moving better. He's been getting the puck out of the zone a lot cleaner. He hasn't been chasing players. So he's doing all the things the Canadiens are asking him, including being a good soldier. That counts for something too. But overall, when you take a look at it, right, the bigger the Canadiens' defense gets, and you know it's going to get bigger when they bring in David Reinbacher, as an example. The bigger the defense gets, the less Robida knows how to coach those guys because he was a good defenseman in his day, right? Small of stature, could bring some offense, was pretty good defensively, but he wasn't the size of an Arbor Jack Eye. He wasn't the size of, let's say, a Noah Dobson. He wasn't the size of a Caden Gooley. Gooley's been playing this kind of defense since before Robida was hired by the Canadiens. So, when he was playing back with the Edmonton Oil Kings is what I'm trying to say. So, what exactly has Robida done in the past few years to make you look at MSL? Should MSL let him go? I don't think the answer to that is no, because the smaller defensemen are developing nice enough that you can't really make that point. But does he need help? As I said, yes. You go out and you bring somebody in, like a Chris Pronger, like a Luke Richardson, actually, if you get Larry Robinson, you give Robida the door. But you see where I'm getting at here, right? You can add to what you have in order to fill a gap from a coaching perspective. It doesn't count against your salary cap. You can hire as many coaches as you want. But I also think, given the fact that Roger Grillo is back in the fold, that will change things as well. So give it some time, because I don't think MSL is going anywhere, and everybody has to stop criticizing Marty St. Louis. For the love of God, in 2022, look at where the team was and look at where it is. Look at the development of Juraj Slafkovsky and ask yourself, does he deserve to be fired? Answer to that is fuck no. He doesn't deserve to be fired. The team's in third of the Atlantic. 2 years ago, they were in the bottom of the East. Does he deserve to get fired? Fuck no. So can we stop with that narrative? And for the love of God, the next person that calls him a Pee Wee coach, I'm reaching through the screen and I'm wringing your neck, because he's not a Pee Wee coach. He's been in the NHL for 4 years, and I guarantee you, Last year, he got nominated for the Jack Adams. He's going to get another nod this year with the work that he's done with the Canadiens. So can we please stop that narrative? Here's a question from Nico, or Nick. Sorry about that. I had a hard time reading your name, Nick. Can Doc reject a one-year qualifying offer? How does it work exactly? I do like Doc, but unfortunately, he can't stay healthy. That's why I'd rather sign Veleno. And that's a fair point. But again, the thing is, between Doc and Veleno, Doc has more upside. Yes, Kirby Doc can reject the offer in terms of not signing the qualifying offer and taking the team to arbitration. But there's a real problem there for Doc in terms of bringing them to arbitration, and it's this. If he does that, all that is a bitch fest between the player and the team trying to show how bad their player is in order to not have the arbitrator rule in his favor. What does that accomplish? There have been very few instances where teams have gone to arbitration with their players. And if Kirby Doc's smart enough, he's going to realize that he's really painted himself into a corner, not on purpose, but in terms of the business of hockey, that's exactly where he is. Because he can't go out and say that he's, lit the lamp a million times. He can go out and argue that when he's been in the lineup, he's been a very good player for the Canadiens. There's no argument there. But he can't go out there and say, you know what, I deserve more money because you're not in the lineup often enough to be able to make that distinction. And so that's why I still think anyway that the Canadiens still are in the driver's seat when it comes to Doc. Qualify him? He says no? Okay, they go to arbitration. The arbitrator decides what you're going to pay him. Whatever he decides in terms of the arbitrator, the Canadiens can either walk away and let him be a free agent or they have to sign him. Depends how old he is, actually. Give me a second, Nick. I'm going to get you that answer right now. So Kirby Doc is 25 years old, and I believe, he would be too old. If the Canadiens reject the qualifying offer based on his years of service and his age, then he would be eligible to become an unrestricted free agent at that point. Paul, yes, I agree. MSL is going nowhere. And anybody who wants him to go somewhere, just stop arguing that point. Let's see here. From Richard. How many goals does Struble have? 1. How many does Jack I have? I think he's got 1. Just from that alone, you have to keep Jack I. Do you mean this season? You're catching me at a disadvantage. The question's not really clear, but let's see here. Arbor Jack I. Let's see his hockey DB. He's got 1 goal, 1 assist this year. Let's see Struble. Strudel. Where are you? There he is. I think he's got more than 1 assist this year. Yeah, he's got 10. So he's got a goal and 10 assists, and Arbor's got a goal and 1 assist. That argument doesn't fly. 34 points in 160 career games for Struble. And for Jack I in 220, he's got 31 points. Again, Struble getting the advantage there. So that argument won't work, but the role argument does. That's why I brought it in that direction. Habs have the opportunity to showcase Struble and trade him in the offseason. The Canadiens had that opportunity in the preseason too, because Boston was looking to make a deal with Montreal to get Struble. That never materialized, though, because Struble didn't really show the way Boston expected. If there's one thing that's gone kind of from Struble's game, it's his physicality, right? He's chasing the big hit in order to garner attention, and that's not part of his game, really. He needs to play more like the defenseman we expect him to be in terms of his mobility, ability to get the puck out effectively, and play better defensively. He makes mistakes. They all do. Hudson made a mistake pinching that early in the hockey game in a game that was that tight. It was 1-0 Montreal. There's no need to pinch there. He did it anyway. Struble made the mistake of coming across. Dano was late because he was waiting to see whether or not Hudson kept the puck in the zone. Again, a wrong read from Dano in that case. He should have been back because the two players from Nashville were actually exiting the zone as Hudson made the pinch. So there's a little bit about play recognition there overall. But when you take a look at the whole grand scheme of things, I mean, yes, ideally I'd like to see them move Struble in order to open up that space for Jack-Eye. But we'll see. Again, you know, to me, it would be a great way for Kent Hughes to tie Stéphane Robidas' hands. Get rid of him. Right? What happened years ago when I think it was Claude Julien was playing Cristobal Huet over José Theodore? Julien got fired. That sent a message, right? And then, of course, Theodore's game went down the toilet and Huet ended up being the starter. But nonetheless, that was the way the GM gave that message. Like, I'm going to get rid of the problem, and this way my guy's going to be able to play. And that's the same thing they can do if they do get rid of a Jaden Struble, because right now on the trade market, he does have a little bit more value than Jack-Eye, outside of the fact that Jack-Eye can beat the living crap out of people. If we're going to make room on the bottom six, we have to do the same thing on defense. Paul, yeah, we do. But the room is already there in the sense that you don't necessarily have to continue playing the same guys. If a guy like Reinbacher, for example, comes up to play with the Canadiens, not saying he will, not saying he won't. I want him to. But if he does before the end of the season and into the playoffs, nothing stops you from sitting Carrier. Okay? And the message is going to be clear from Kent Hughes. I'm bringing Reinbacher up so you can use him on the right side. Use him on the right side. Sit out Struble if you have to. Sit out whoever. Play your three right, play your three left. Simple as that, right? We'll see what happens. But again, those decisions can often be taken out of the hands based on what the GM tells you. Because the GM will come in and tell Marty, we're bringing up David Reinbacher. He's ready for you, but you need to play him. Marty's going to turn around and tell Robida. Robida's going to have to do it. If the kid screws the pooch, Robida goes to MSL and he says, I'm going to have to sit the kid. He's making mistakes out there. And you revisit it after practice and whatever. That's the normal chain of command. Now, whether or not Robida's going over and telling the truth, maybe Robida just doesn't like Arbor or the way Arbor plays or the fact that Arbor's so big, his hands are as big as Robida's head. Like, I don't know. Like, it's hard to put my finger on it because it's not a normal situation when it comes to Jack-Eye. The kid's got a lot of tools that he can use on the ice. His shot, his ability to skate, his physicality. And I'm not talking about dropping the gloves. I'm talking about the way he hits. If he could streamline the way he plays in terms of fitting into what is expected of him vis-a-vis not chasing players and being a lot cleaner with the puck, he's not going to give them much of a choice. So we'll see what happens there. Nick, you believe Montembeault can be a good backup goalie for another NHL team? I believe that as well. I honestly don't think that Montembeault's a starter. Never have. Never will. Okay, and while he did fill in nicely for the Canadiens when they needed somebody to fill in, he still wasn't anywhere near the quality that you need from a starting goaltender. I mean, he's got a career, what, an 896 save percentage or something to that effect? I mean, that's nowhere near good enough. You need at least a 905. And that's what they're getting right now from Dobeš. So whether that's sustainable remains to be seen. But right now, he's giving them exactly what they need. So you move forward with that. Intertop. Laine does not fit the long-term plans of the Habs. Well, it doesn't fit the long-term plans of the Habs' plans. Sorry, I read that wrong, but it was written wrong, so I was trying to correct it on the fly. Jack-Eye, you keep and commit to property development. Trust him and allow him to be himself. Can't say a player with a shot of 107 has no role. And I believe that 1,000%. When it comes to Patrick Laine, okay, I forget where I heard this, but you needed to listen to Ivan Demidov and you needed to listen to Oliver Kapanen in terms of what he's been able to teach the younger players, even with the fact that he hasn't been in the lineup. The fact that he can have that positive effect on young players is something you think about in terms of Patrick Laine. I'm going to get back to what I've been saying from before, right? Everybody's been talking about Patrick Laine was trade bait, before the deadline. And I'm going to tell you that's bull. Patrick Laine, there's a reason why he's not playing right now. He's not 100% healthy. And so the Canadiens can't afford to put him in there, right? Because if he gets injured again, it's curtains, right? Maybe for his career. So they're trying to save that part of him. But also, I know he doesn't fit in long term in terms of where the Canadiens and where the direction is going. So we'll see what happens. But here's the thing that I want to ask you guys. If Patrick Laine, who's making, $8.7 million this year, or 9.7, I forget, without looking, if he decides to take a significant pay cut to stay in Montreal, let's say he says, I'll take half of what you're giving me. Do you reconsider and think about keeping him? Or is that too much to ask given the fact that you've got that same situation in Kirby Dach? Patrick Laine was able to give you 20 goals a couple of seasons ago. If he can stay healthy, we know he can be a threat. And we know he likes the city of Montreal because it reminds him more of home than anywhere else. He likes the organization. He likes the people. He likes the way he's being treated. So does his wife. So ask yourself the question. If he turns around and he says, guys, I'd like to ask you to make me an offer. Even if it's 1 year at 4.5. I'm not telling you to sign him long term. But let's say the Canadiens say they give him another one of those prove-it contracts. We'll give you 4.5 for 1 year. Show us that you can stay healthy and contribute throughout an 82-game season. Would you, Habs fans, be interested in that? Put it in the chat. Let me see a little bit later. Intertap, Bolduc is slowly coming into his own. He's rugged and can score. Big part of our future, and I agree. He is a big part of our future, but early on this season, he wasn't being physical. And that is what was hurting him, because that's what the Canadiens were looking for more than anything else. When they put Slavkovsky on the second line with Kapanen and Demidov after the Newhook injury, that's what they were expecting from Bolduc. Physicality, an ability to finish. And at the beginning, he showed that he can finish, right? He got a couple of points with that line, and he was looking good. And then all of a sudden, here's the cliff. And I fell right off. And that's the part that the Canadiens have been trying to avoid in terms of Bolduc's development, because that hurts a player's confidence. They want to see him do better. They took him off the first line. They put him on the third and fourth, back and forth from time to time, and they changed his role to try to get him to do exactly what they did with Josh Anderson, in the sense that they took the responsibility of scoring out of his hands and asked him to be more of a complete player. If Bolduc becomes more of a complete player, where he's throwing body checks and he's finishing, that's what the Canadiens were expecting of him in the first place. So it's the right move. We'll see whether or not it continues, but I agree with you. He is going to be a big part of this team's future moving forward. If a team offers Sheets Arbor for $2.2 million or $2.2 for a three-year contract at the cost of a third-round pick, would you match that? Absolutely. In a heartbeat, because he's not one that I'm letting go. $2.2 million is not a lot of money. A third-round pick would never be enough for a guy like Arbor Xhekaj, in my mind anyway, because of what the role that he brings and the role that he fits into in terms of the Canadiens' depth. I'm not letting him go. But the other question is this. If you do decide to let him go for the 2.2 and get back that third-round pick, here's the question. Does that then become Florian Xhekaj's job in the Canadiens lineup? That's where you have to balance it out, right? Are you going to have two guys that look the same out there? We know it was cool in the preseason when Florian and Arbor played together, when Florian got into a scrap and you saw Big Brother come over to try to help him out. It's cool. It's a great story. But long term, does it work? I don't think so. So, again, to me, you keep Arbor and that's it. And I don't think any team out there is going to give up a third-round pick for Arbor Xhekaj. Just saying. Because right now we're talking about people trading a third-round pick to get Montembeault. You see the difference in the value there? I'm just saying, like 2.2 for Arbor Xhekaj and a third-round pick, I don't think that's enough. I'm just saying. Monty does need a fresh start, inner top. I agree. Zeffel Cave. Haven't seen that name before. Richard, we were all at the Tampa Canadiens game in Florida last December 28th, and frankly, no one was very impressed with Fowler. That game went to 5-4 for Tampa. And that's what I'm talking about, right? At that stretch in December, he had played a few games already, and really, he wasn't ready for a team like Tampa. He is now. And so this stretch should be a little different. And that's not to say that I expect Fowler to play against Tampa. That's a game that they're going to start Dobish, without a doubt for me, especially given the result in December. But when you take a look at things overall, you cannot tell me that, Fowler has not done things in this season that you would be impressed with, or you shouldn't be impressed with, because he has. He's shown you a lot of poise. He's still got work to do on his game. A rookie goaltender is never perfect, unless, of course, you're Patrick Waugh, wins the Stanley Cup in your first year. But even Patrick Waugh would give up a lot of big rebounds. The difference is that Waugh had the ability to get back and stop the pucks. He would make spectacular saves when he needed to. Fowler, he's done that as well. Dobish has done that too. So we'll see how that works out. But in terms of how he's developed, Marco Marciano, getting back to the goaltending coach, has done really good work with both Dobish and Fowler, especially in the American Hockey League. Now they're both at the NHL level. That's the reason why Fowler's here, because they saw him developing under Marciano, getting better. They wanted that to continue, and it's going to continue. So even if the Canadiens do play him against Tampa, you're going to see a different version of Jacob Fowler as opposed to what you saw on December 28th. It was a little bit more raw back then. Let's see here. Why did my screen jump? Zeffel Cave. I like Mailloux. He was not part of the choices from management. I like the fact that the Canadiens went out and got Bolduc because they needed some depth at wing. I understand why they gave up Mailloux, given his history. I didn't like the fact that they did it, though. Because to me, Mailloux is the next guy coming up, right before Reinbacher. You picture this team right now if the Canadiens didn't have to go out and get Alexander Carrier and they had Logan Mailloux in that spot instead. Think about that for a minute. Just let it sink in. And then you think about it again where, you've got Dobson, you've got Mailloux, you've got Reinbacher on your right side, and then you've got Hudson, Gooley, and whoever else is there, whether it's Struble, Jackeye, whomever, or Matheson, for that matter. You've got depth. You've got choices. You've got strength. And the Canadiens really needed that. So it was the one deal I didn't agree with in terms of what Kent Hughes did. Has it turned out for the best? We still don't know. You can never know until a few seasons down the road. Mailloux started off poorly with St. Louis. His game has turned around. Bolduc started strong with the Canadiens, and his game tailed off. Whether or not that balances out to start next season, we'll see. But overall, I was a little disappointed when they let go of Mailloux, that's to be sure. I like the duo of Texier and Bolduc together, speed and grit with a wicked shot. I don't see how you believe that Texier is that fast. I don't see him as being fast. Is he skilled? Absolutely. Has he got slick hands? No doubt. But I don't find him fast per se. And he's added the physical dimension to his game of late, but then you see what happens to him in terms of getting injured. So, the jury's still out with Texier, right? There's a reason why St. Louis let him go, or bought him out, and the Canadiens picked him up for a song and dance. Whether or not that remains next year, that's another story altogether. Let's see here. Nick. As long as Robidas is behind the bench, I don't see Jackeye getting the opportunities to develop. I would tend to agree. But again, like I said, there has to be a point in time where somebody, cuts bait. And whether it's the GM or the coach, somebody's got to say to Robida, you've got to play the kid. You cannot have him sitting in the press box for weeks at a time. because we're going to need him in the playoffs. And that's the thing that I think they're not recognizing here. With the way the game is played, especially in the first round, as you get deeper into the playoffs, the second, third, and fourth round isn't quite as robust in terms of, the possibility of overindulgence physically. I think that in that first round, you definitely need Jack Eye. And the one thing you can't afford to do is have him lose his game completely before you get into that first round. So he's going to need to see ice here. And so somebody's got to tell Roby that, listen, we got to play the kid. He's going to be in the lineup. Use him. Give him 10 to 12 minutes, whatever the case is. Give him some time on the ice. I think that's the direction they need to go in. Paul, Monty did us proud, but I think he's the odd man out. Hopefully they can find a team that will like him as a backup. You know what? There might be a team too, Paul, that might want him as a starter. There's plenty of teams out there. When you take a look at the Edmonton Oilers, for example, who went out and got Tristan Jarry from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that hasn't worked out. It's always possible that Edmonton might decide, you know what, the Canadiens are looking to get rid of Montembeault. Let's see what we can offer. The possibility is there. So let's not count out his ability to be a starter just yet. If he could refine his game, he could serve a purpose for a team out there. Do I want him to be a starter? I think going back to being a backup might help him a little bit, but in his own mind right now, he wants to be a starting goaltender. So try to find him something that works out that way. If not, well, it is what it is. But I think Monty could be a starter elsewhere when the pressure's not there and the focus isn't solely on him. I would start Fowler tomorrow and Dobish Sunday. You need to give Fowler some work. I agree, Paul. I also don't think that the Carolina game is the one I would want to see Fowler in, right? We saw what Carolina did to Montreal in that game that Dobish was outstanding in. Are we going to see the same performance against them? That's hard to say. We may not see the same performance from Carolina in that game either. They may change their game plan, whatever. But at the end of the day, you stick to what works. Nashville, not nearly as offensively gifted as Carolina, not nearly as pressure heavy as Carolina. Carolina likes to use a two-man forecheck. You need a goaltender who's quick in his crease, who can make reads, and Dobish has proven to be able to do that. So I would go with the guy who's got a little bit more experience. MSL was small and fast as a player. I don't think we should take any player under 6'2". If that was the case, Richard, a lot of guys wouldn't even be playing in the National Hockey League. We wouldn't have Cole Caulfield on this team. You wouldn't have Alex Newhook. You can't take a guy out of the lineup because of his height, okay? Would the Canadiens have Lane Hudson? Nope. Would they have signed Owen Protz to an entry-level contract? Owen's not a big kid. He's 5'10", tops. I know him personally. Played for the Ottawa Junior Senators in the CCHL. And while the kid can hit like a truck, right? And that's the reason why he's gotten this contract, because he's been a robust left-hand defenseman at the junior level. So he's going to be able to prove to the Canadiens what he can do in the AHL next year. But when you completely close off that avenue, you take away a lot of what you might be able to have. And that's not to say I disagree 1,000%, but there are players out there who are 6'1", 6'2", that aren't physical, that can't play a physical game, and that get pushed around easy, like an Alexander Texier. So that part of it I disagree with, because picture this team for the last 15 years without Brendan Gallagher. Just as an example, a guy who previously scored 30 goals in this league, who took a beating in front of your net. I don't agree with that at all. Size does not matter at all. You take a player based on what role you want to give him and what he can bring to the table. If he scores, if he's tough, if he can throw body checks, if he can fight, all these different things factor in. Height, sure, factors in what? If he's going to play third or fourth line minutes, sure, I could see you getting a bigger player. But when you're talking about skill-wise, I don't see why you would limit yourself to players under over 6'2" at all. I agree that he's worth something, Joe. I am not moving him. He's not getting traded. He needs to be played, but the Canadiens can ill afford to trade him. And as we mentioned before, Joe, a lot of teams would want Monty. I just mentioned Edmonton as one of them. A guy who's got experience, a guy who's got playoff experience. Tristan Jarry, his career's over. Hell, the Leafs might even look at getting Montembeault, given their situation. You just never know. We'll see what happens. Doc would make a decent winger with size, but lacks consistency, poor hockey IQ. I disagree with that. And his inability to stay healthy makes him expendable. Players in the pipeline will fill in his role easily. That I can get around. I don't know if it's easy, though, because Doc's got upper level hockey IQ. I disagree with that part, Enotap, completely. He's proven in junior and at the NHL level that he's got brains to play this game. And yes, does he lack consistency? Sure. Why? Because he's not in the lineup often enough, right? Because he gets injured. Huge win. Hugo win 25. I don't believe I would offer a contract to Doc. You're entitled to your opinion, man. To me, I'd give him another year to prove it. That is my take on it because he's got value. And the other thing is, when you're talking about offering him a contract, you're also building value in the player being able to move him at the deadline if he stays healthy and he can contribute. If he doesn't, you wash your hands and you move forward from there. Hugo win. I keep saying huge win. Hugo win 25. I think we have a logjam of young players and need to free up space for someone with a higher ceiling who's more adorable and more physical, like Florian. May not have his skill, has other things we need. Look, I don't disagree that Florian can be a very productive player with the Canadiens, much like, say, a Chris Nyland was back in the day. Right? People didn't expect him to do much other than fight. Look how he turned out. And we know Florian's got more talent than that. Right? So to be able to say that, that's one thing. But to turn around and say that we need to open up the logjam for young players, who in the top 6 are you going to get rid of? Who in the bottom 6 are you going to get rid of? Okay, you've already got Gallagher and Anderson coming off the books next season. Not this year, but next. That will open up space. As I mentioned, you don't have to look at that now. You've got 4 RFAs, right? That's why I looked at it, because there's 4. You asked me about Jack Guy in and of himself, but there's 4 guys that are RFAs. Veleno was signed for less than $1 million. I can cut bait with him anytime I want because he wasn't a huge risk. Doc, I want to see whether or not he could stay healthy because his knee issues have come and gone. We haven't seen anything from his knees this year. He looks great. And then he breaks his foot. Oh, bad luck. We get it. But if he could stay healthy for a long stretch, he can be a very productive player with his team. That's why I want that prove-it contract. When it comes to Zach, you give him the bridge, and Arbor, you keep. Simple stuff, guys. I mean, don't rewrite this. I mean, it's not, you don't need to free up space right now because who in the minors, outside of Michael Hage, right, who everybody's expecting him to come to Montreal, do you think we need to make space for? And Hage is a center. What are you going to do? Put him on the wing? Are you going to get rid of Philip Danault in the offseason? Or are you going to take away the space and time for Jake Evans? Or are you going to get rid of Oliver Kapanen, who's among the rookie leaders in goal scoring? Tough questions, right? It's not as simple as you might think. There's a lot of different factors you have to look at when you're the general manager of the Canadiens. I know that we all want to see Michael Hage, right? But Oliver Kapanen plays a good two-way game. I'm sure Hage can get there, but can he? Hard to say at the NHL level, right? Then you take a look at Evans. We know what value Evans brings to the table, especially when it comes to penalty killing. With Phil Danault, he wins faceoffs and he kills penalties. Everybody's got their role. So how can you say in good conscience that you're going to open up a space on this team right now for Michael Hage that easily? I don't think it's easy. And it's the same reason why they're not bringing up a guy like Reinbacher on the back end. There's no limit right now to who you can have in your lineup. There's a limit on how much you can have under the cap. Right now, the Canadiens have $1.6 million under the cap in terms of prorated money. Okay? They can bring up Reinbacher if they want. They've been able to do that since the 16th. They've chosen not to. Why? We'll see. If Hage decides to come to Montreal and he's still got some more of his playoffs to go in the NCAA, in fact, Michigan looks like they're going to end up going to the Frozen Four, so the focus isn't there just yet. So we'll see what happens. But there's no need to rush it. Okay? Doc is a very good player. If you give him a fourth line or third line role on the wing, not at center, it has nothing to do with anything you're doing with Hage, right? Owen Beck's a center, nothing to do with that. So you see where I'm going with this. Let's see. Yeah, I hope that Arbor gets an opportunity for it's Robida again that's going to give him the opportunity to play. Paul, no, I would not keep Laine even after the pay cut. We need two-way players, not just a power play specialist. In my opinion, he would be a detriment to our team and interfere with the development of younger players. I can't totally disagree with that, but as I've said, he's already helped two younger players being out of the lineup. So I don't think that's a detriment or interference by any stretch. And in terms of his two-way game, he was showing glimpses early on that his two-way game was getting better, even in practice. So you got to give the guy a benefit of the doubt. Do I re-sign him offhand? No. But we never know what the Canadiens might do. Do you move on from him that easily? There's no room for him in the top 6. So the answer to that most likely is yes, but we'll see what happens. But again, if he comes back and he says, sign me for 4.5, I give it consideration if I'm Kent Hughes. I really do. And that's the part that Intertop asks here about Laine. And yeah, I agree. It's tough. He'd be a good PP2 player, but where you play him at 5-on-5? And no, we didn't have that with Hoffman because Hoffman could score in the power play anyway. Laine seems to be a great teammate and deserves a fresh start. Well, that's what he was hoping to get here in Montreal, but injuries have derailed that a little bit. But yeah, he looks like a very cool guy, right? Somebody that you want to have around. Coach, what do you think of Danault? He's looking slow. I wonder whether Beck can replace him next year. Danault's under contract for another year, so I don't know if that's going to happen unless the Canadiens get rid of him. Thank God you got our goalie coach fired. Good job. I did? I'm not taking credit for that. He did that job all by himself. Ghost KPR, what's up, coach? Enjoy the weekend. Question, do you think our lack of size and ability to get nasty will be addressed in the offseason? And how many big bodies do you think we need with that ability? That's an excellent question, Ghost. But I don't think we need to get overly physical, right? You could use a little bit of size on the bottom 6. What I want to see more from this team in terms of what they need is energy. And I think that's part of what's lacking here in terms of the third and fourth line. Their ability to provide energy shifts and swing momentum, like we've seen in the past from the Canadiens' fourth lines, isn't really there. And whether that's through a big hit or whether that's through hard forechecking or cycling the puck down low for a prolonged period of time, we just don't see that from those lines. And so I don't know if it's a question of big bodies as opposed to guys that can grind in terms of getting the pucks down low and be able to cycle and create chances off the cycle and stuff like that. That's what this team needs. And would I like to have physical players? Sure. But if there's one thing we know about Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton is they're not going to go out and get an overly large guy without the ability to think the game the way they need it to be thought out, right? Because playing 5-on-5 at both ends of the rink seems to be very difficult for a lot of people. It takes a special kind of mind, and we've seen that, right? So I'd like to add a physical body up front, that's for sure. And the guy that I think could fill that mold is Florian Jacki. I think we've already got him in the system in terms of a guy that's got the hockey IQ, a guy that can hit, a guy that can make plays, score goals, everything. Florian fits that bill. So I don't think we need to go out and get anybody, because if you add Florian, you've already got Anderson for another year, right? Who's a big physical guy. You've still got the toughness of guys like Kirby Dach can be physical. Where was I going? Zach Botzuk is starting to play a more physical game. So you've got all that coming. I don't really foresee the need of going out to get too many other bodies, to be honest. Yep, Robida, definitely not my favorite. I can tell you that. Meant to say Arbor never gets to play with Hudson. And again, that comes down to what we were talking about in terms of trust, but also ability. Because Arbor is not that kind of defenseman to be able to provide as much offense as Jaden Struble can. Jaden Struble's got more skill in that respect. So that's why he gets to play with Hudson. The other reason why he gets to play with Hudson is also because the analytics numbers overwhelmingly show that, you know, their time on the ice is well spent. And that happens when, you know, you send them out there and they've got an offensive zone start and their Corsi 4 is upwards of 75%. It's skewed. If you had those numbers based on starts out of the defensive zone, I doubt the Corsi would be anywhere that high. So again, eye test versus analytics. I trust the eye test more, but sometimes you get coaching staffs that make decisions based on that. And that is kind of the thing I think that Robida does more than anybody else. So we'll see. Jacques Villot, Domi. I think Domi really burned this bridge here in Montreal, to be honest. Not necessarily with Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton, but with ownership. Because they gave him an opportunity. He took it the first year, and then the second year, it just wasn't there for him. And then what did he do? He badmouthed the organization. The organization didn't do anything wrong, okay? Given the fact that I worked in the diabetes community amongst players that handle their type 1 diabetes, I think the mistake that Domi made during that time was that he decided to get off his insulin pump and instead decided to inject himself manually. That, if not managed properly, can really be a detriment to any player, whether you're in the National Hockey League, AHL, or otherwise. 95% of players that have diabetes, whether you're looking at Kaapo Kähkönen or Max Domi. Now, who else is there? Oh, Jesus. My God. There's a bunch of other players out there that wear pumps, but my mind just isn't clicking right now. But 95% of players with diabetes use insulin pumps because it manages your insulin during a game, and you don't have to worry about it, right? You don't have to adjust anything. It monitors your sugar level and boosts it up or lowers it in terms of, you know, feeding you more insulin. And that's where he made the mistake, right? He got himself his dog, right? His care dog and all that, who can see what was going on in terms of his diabetes and sense it. But that's never your dog's not on the ice with you, right? So if you're not feeling great and you inject too much, then your sugar level comes down. And while you're on the bench or on the ice, it's much harder to adjust, right? You can't take your blood sugar on the bench. You know, you have your glucose monitor on your arm or on your stomach or wherever Max decided to put it. But again, managing it manually when you play a high octane sport like hockey, it's too much to ask of yourself. And your focus can't be on the game at that point. And I think that's what hurt Max. He went back to the pump. We see more from him now. But he burnt that bridge with the organization, so I don't really want to see him back in Montreal. Theo Fleury, another little guy. Yeah, listen, I disagree. Ghost, you disagree with me. Saturday's the starter spot. Dobish has earned his Saturday night. I also see it for a big opportunity to Fowler to show what he's made of. If this was the middle of the season, Ghost, I would agree, without a shadow of a doubt. But right now, given how tight the playoff race is and how important wins and losses are, what happens if this goes sideways on you and you lose the Saturday night game because Dobish just gets outplayed by Nashville, and then you put Fowler into a situation with Carolina just completely blows them out of the water? You do more than one thing there. You not only lose 4 points out of a possible 4, but you also end up putting questions into a young goaltender's mind. To me, I'm giving him the easier of the two matchups. And while Nashville is no pushover, you have to admit they're the easier of the two. Not only that, but they're also the less important in terms of points because Carolina's in the Eastern Conference. So you can disagree, but I looked at this and like Dobish has also played a few games in a row. So give Fowler Saturday. It's not at home. If it was at home, it'd be a different story, I would think. But I still would give Nashville to Fowler, Dobish, his second shot at Carolina. And Rabinov. I love Doc as a player, but he cannot stay healthy. He'll never play more than 50 games per season. Unfortunately, you need to move on. And that's the question why I give him that prove-it contract, the 1 year, one more year before he ends up being a UFA. If you can give me a 50-game season or a 60 or a 70, then we look at possibly signing you long-term. If you can't give me that, I'm out. 1 more year because, you know, he's been unlucky. Let's be honest, right? And when he's healthy, I like the way that kid plays. So we'll see what they decide, but that would be my way of going. And yeah, you could disagree. That's fine. You understand that Nashville's a weaker team, Ghost, but historically, night one of the back-to-back is the starter spot. And is history always right? No. You know, you could be as historic all you want, right? It's never always right. And right now, you really do have to focus on the minutia of what's going on. There are 12 games left, I think, for the Canadiens in this season. And you can ill afford. They need 10 points to get to 100? Let me go back to the standings for a minute. I had them up here for a minute. They're 10 points away from 100. That's 5 wins, right? And they've got 11 games left, not 12. So they need to win half. Half of those come on this very trip. You can't afford to make mistakes. It's as simple as that. I get where you're going, and I understand historically. But a lot of times history has not been favorable to the Canadiens, especially in a game when you're going on a long road trip. That first game is where your forwards and defense are nowhere near as good as they should be. So, again, I'm going to Fowler, and I want to get the win on Sunday, so I put Dobish in there. Hey, no channel. Florian, when he's ready, is going to be given the space. And while Beck is another guy that I'm not 100% behind. Why? I'm going to give you two words. Joshua Roy. Here's another guy who in the American Hockey League is a stud, right? Plays extremely well, gets points, looks like a superstar. Comes to the NHL, brain cramp. And yes, Owen Beck's got 1 goal in how many? I think it's 12 NHL games that he's played. But above and beyond that, has he really brought much to the table? Not really. Joshua Roy got more of a look. Couldn't do anything with it, right? And so I don't want that same thing to happen with Owen Beck where we open up the spot for him and he can't fill it. I'm not sure of that yet, right? Do I look at the preseason? Do I give him a few more games at the beginning of the year? Sure, if I can. But right now, I'm looking at building. And Owen Beck, to me, is on the outside looking in terms of that. Because he hasn't really shown me anything at the NHL level to tell me that he can come in. Not only that, but again, I'm going to come back to the Michael Hage discussion. If you're going to make room for Hage, that makes Beck expendable. Because what are you going to do? You're going to put Beck in to replace Evans? No. You're going to put Beck in to replace Danault? Not right now. There's a lot that needs to be done to this team. We're still rebuilding. I'm not convinced that Beck is the answer at center. I don't think he is. And so why am I going to turn around and make space for him at center when right now up the middle, it's looking more and more like it's going to be Suzuki, Kapanen, Hage, Evans. We need a left-handed center. I'm going to bring up Beck too. You got to think about that when you're looking at these things, right? Yes, Hage. That's why I brought that up. Never understood why Arbor didn't develop that 100-mile-an-hour slap shot of his. A wasted skill. I don't think he didn't develop it. I think the Canadiens don't game plan for it. Right? He doesn't see power play time, right? He doesn't get the puck with enough time at the blue line to be able to wind up and let it rip. If he ever does, God help the goaltender that's in nets, and God help the guy that tries to block that shot. But he's got it. He just needs to find the way to use it. And that's part of the development curve that he hasn't been able to develop because of the fact he doesn't see enough ice. Seeing the Struble and Hudson line be okay is a little bit of street, because you know how much better and productive Hudson would be on his left side with a stay-at-home, reliable partner. And that's what I'm expecting when David Reinbacher comes up. But yeah, I agree with that, Ghost. Joe. A lot of what ifs. Hockey 101. Play the hot goalie. You cannot sit a rookie for a prolonged period of time. It's unfair. If you're going to do that, you might as well have sent Fowler back to the AHL and let Monty be the backup. Just saying. What if Dobich gets a shutout? What if Fowler stands on his head? Listen, I'm not saying you don't primarily go with Dobich here, but it's a back-to-back, right? You give the first game to the kid who hasn't played very much in the last few games, right? Imagine game number 1 in Montreal. That'll be crazy. It absolutely will. And with that, I've gotten through the chat. We've gotten through an hour and a half, and it's time to me to say goodnight. It's been another great live edition of Puck Talk Montreal, folks. Again, please put in the comments from the beginning of the show. 4 fewer games in their division. I don't know where you see that, because they've got 71. They've got 1 in hand on the Sabres, 1 in hand on the Bruins, 1 in hand on Ottawa, even with Detroit. They haven't played 4 fewer 4-point games. And no, I don't think we're in the playoffs guaranteed just yet, Jacques. And Peter Colis, thanks for listening to the show. Why not try out Reinbacher? I'm asking myself that same question. Totally asking myself that same question. We'll see. There's still 12 games left. With that, I bid you all good night. Remember to, if you're watching the show recorded, make sure you put your thoughts in the comments, and we'll come back to them. Either I'll answer them online, or we'll come back to them in a different show. I love you guys for tuning in. And just one thing before I do go, because there was something that happened online recently where I got a comment from KJ in terms of how I was presenting the show. And he said that I went on for something for 10 minutes and whatever. I just want you guys to understand this. I am trying really hard to keep my segments down to about 3 minutes per subject, right? And, you know, I do take a lot of notes now, and oftentimes you're going to see me reading the notes off my screen in front of me, right? And which is normal, but they're notes. It's not full paragraphs. It's not whatever. It's bullet points that I put down for myself. And sometimes it takes me a second to register what I'm trying to say, to make it clear so that it sounds like it's intelligent enough for you guys to understand what I'm trying to say. But to come back and say what KJ said was a little difficult to take because of how much effort I've been putting into, you know, keeping these segments short and sweet. But I do want to say that I appreciate all of you guys that came in my defense. Love that you did that for me. So appreciative of it. So thank you. Appreciate that you love the show so much and that you're appreciating my effort. I forget who it was. I'd be remiss to remember who it was. I think it was Ben that outlined the fact that I work with junior teams, and, you know, I take the time to put a lot of effort into the visuals and whatever for the show. So thank you for noticing. Thank you for appreciating it. And again, above all else,